Right. Hello, everyone. This is episode 22 of Dispersing the Fog. This is August 3rd, 2025. Middle of the summer. Lots going on around Nova Scotia. Lots of visitors to this part of the country and probably others as well. I want to welcome everybody who's watching us live or listening to us on a podcast or watching later on YouTube. And I want to welcome and say hi to Paul Palango. How are you doing, Paul?
Hello, Adam. How are you? Long time no see.
Yeah, it has been a little while. It feels like, well, we do this every week, folks. But last week, actually, we recorded a couple of days early, and so that's I'm telling you that because it's relevant to one of the stories we're going to be covering. So I haven't seen Paul in just over a week now. It seems like it's been forever.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've been busy. I've been busy.
Yeah,
It's
been busy. We'll come to that in just a second. I just want to give people a quick preview of what we're gonna talk about the hockey verdict. We're gonna have a few other stories to get to. And then we're going to bring in Curt Allen. We talked about him all show last week. Curt is ready. He's ready to join us this week, and former Deputy Commissioner Curt Allen, that is. So he's lots to say about the policing review. We had intentions this week actually of having two guests on. We were going to do our debut. It wasn't going to be a panel, but two guests. We had Andrew Douglas from Frank Magazine ready to talk about a story, really interesting case that he's in the middle of. He's involved in. There's a publication ban issue, lots of different things. But Andrew managed to get himself in a position where he can't talk about it. Andrew was on the stand as of, I guess, Thursday, and then the case was adjourned until this coming week. So when you're in the middle of testifying as a witness, you're not allowed to talk to anybody. You're allowed to talk to people, but you're not allowed to talk to anybody about the evidence that you're giving. So he's kind of stuck in a spot where he couldn't come on the show this week, but we'll get him on either next week or very soon to talk about this story that he's in the middle of. That happens sometimes, Paul. Actually, we get this in the middle of criminal trials, like even over a lunch break. You're like, well, because you want to talk to your client during breaks and talk about strategy and all these things. It's like, well, you can't be on the stand then when a break comes. Excuse me, because then you're not able to actually speak about the case. You have to go in different directions and all that stuff. So things to think about.
the life and times of a lawyer. I guess
Yeah,
I
yeah.
avoided it.
Exciting stuff. Even in the middle of the summer, these things come along. Although I will say in August, things do slow down. It tends to be around the criminal courts anyway. But
I
Paul,
should tell you, my maternal grandfather, after I'd been a journalist for a couple of years, pulled me aside and said, "Okay, you've been having lots of fun doing this. Now, why don't you go to school and become a lawyer or a doctor?" And I
well,
declined.
I wouldn't say I could say you missed your calling, Paul, but because it's investigative journalist to lawyer, there's a lot of transferable skills and similar kind of things there. But I think you're doing just fine where you are. Tell us about your week.
Same old. I'm just sort of negotiating all kinds of things, sort of trying to get a plan for the next 2 years of my life of what I'm going to be doing, and just a lot going on. It's I can't
I,
say any more than that.
well, it's fu- I was thinking about you actually. I was out for a run listening to a podcast, Outside Magazine podcast with Alex Honnold, who was the star of Free Solo, which won an Oscar a couple of years ago. Rock climber, did the solo climb of the face of Yosemite in the States. Anyway, so his he's like, well, what do you do? You're always thinking of the next thing and the next thing and the next thing because you don't want that letdown after a big project is done. Well, you just finished a big project, obviously, with your book. And what do you do to keep from having a letdown after a book like, a project is done?
I don't know. I'm sort of experienced at doing it, and I don't get really sort of discombobulated. I'm moving forward on a couple of, the book isn't dead because we're still dealing with potential documentaries and films and things like that. There's a big mix going on there. I'm also looking at a couple of other book projects that are moving forward that I've been working on in the background. So there's always something going on. Plus, I have glass things to make, you know.
Yeah.
Although Donald Trump's trying to kill that business and is being very successful, it seems.
You have 35% tariffs on your glass products now? Is that their what's
Well,
the
it's
deal?
not only, yeah, it's no, we're covered by NAFTA, but where he gets us now is this week he's canceling the de minimis, which is any order, anything shipped under $800 just floated through the border in the past. And now everything is going to be charged 50, 80, $100, $200, no matter what it is. So people don't see that coming. It's so, a lot of our customers are buying from us retail and we're shipping into the States. Well, you're shipping into the States now. It's going to tack on another 50, 80, 100, $200 to an order that might only be 50, $80.
Yeah.
It's insanity.
Yeah, well, it's affecting so many things across the country, and for business cycles and big investments that could be made on large projects, the uncertainty of the situation is enough to keep investors back and just, all right, we'll park our money in safe investments for now and think about big projects once there's a little more certainty of the situation.
But I can tell you this,
Yeah.
he stopped us from shipping fentanyl across the border. Oh, no, we weren't doing that. Oh, in fact, I don't know anyone who was doing that, but I mean, it's insanity.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not stuffing fentanyl inside the glass cats and
Yeah, yeah, it's like, yeah,
blue
that's what we're
compartments there. Yeah. Well,
It's
they're
a joke. If you're monitoring it, it's a joke.
don't happen. Do
Yeah,
not use that quote in a search warrant
yeah,
application.
yeah.
It's not legitimate. So Paul, there was a couple of stories that came out. Before we get into the hockey story, I wanted to just mention a couple of verdicts that are creating a little buzz around the criminal law world from the Supreme Court of Canada. There was two. One was on youth sentencings and adult, youth that are being sentenced as adults. The Supreme Court of Canada has made that a more difficult process. I guess from the youth perspective, a more fair process, so they're not likely to get sent up to adult court. So a couple of decisions came down. Six, cases are tough ones. First degree murder in both cases, 16-year-olds and a 17-year-old. The 17-year-old went and told his classmate about it a week later. And, anyway, so it's all about the diminished moral blameworthiness of youth and whether youth sentences are of sufficient length. So the court has made that more difficult to get youth sentences adults. So that's news, and that's having reverberations around courts and across the country. Second one is a schizophrenic was found uh, guilty of murder, but was had made a pitch that on appeal that he was not criminally responsible. And so there's a new sort of standard out for what makes somebody not criminally responsible. It used to be you had to be able to kind of make decisions that were in your own best interest. I mean, that's if you're criminally responsible or, able to run your own case. Now it's no, it doesn't have to be a decision in your best interest as long as you're not overwhelmed by delusions or hallucinations. You can make decisions however you want. If they're not in your own best interest, well, that's your problem. You're not delusional. It's a free country. So some changes coming there. Anything notable about those from your world?
Well, it's just, it's getting difficult. That whole issue is difficult because gangs are recruiting younger and younger kids to commit crimes.
Yeah,
And, if you're making it easier on the kids and making it more difficult to bring them to adult court when they're acting as de facto adults for adult enterprises, geez, what bad can happen here?
yeah. Well,
14-year-old hitmen, 12-year-old hitmen, they're doing it now.
And Paul, the very fact that you could be, as a 17-year-old, you would agree to be recruited by some older guys to do a
Yeah,
crime would probably be evidence that you're not all that mature. And you'd probably it's sort of self-fulfilling in that sense.
yeah.
Uh, okay, so those
And the
were,
other story that caught my eye, just to mention it,
yeah,
is the CBC story from the other day about the RCMP showing up at the door of the mother of the late Beals,
yeah,
and the two Mounties wanted to speak to him, and he had been murdered a year earlier in an unsolved case.
man.
Um, this is they were chasing down the report of an impaired driver, and then went to his house because the suspect had a name similar to that of Tyrell Beals, and you'd think the Mounties would be able to sort of determine or know that someone had been murdered a year earlier.
Yeah.
And but it speaks to the lack of sort of continuity in Mountie operations, that they don't even know who's in their community and what's going on. And looking at the video of this on the CBC, it appeared to be that this may have been a training exercise where there were two Mounties. There was the older Mountie and the younger Mountie, and the
Mhm.
older Mountie was showing the younger Mountie how to do things. So that should give you some comfort.
Well, good mentorship there. Let's go
Yeah.
knock on the door of, poor mother whose son has been murdered.
And you haven't solved the crime.
No. Yeah. Just a reminder to her, by the way. Oh, yeah, you still haven't solved that.
Yeah.
The other case just before the hockey story came out this week as a Court of Appeal decision in Nova Scotia on Lyle Howe trying to get himself readmitted into the legal profession. And I know Lyle Howe. I'm familiar with the case and talked to him about it. But the interesting part of the Court of Appeal decision was they talked about this Ruck Report, which was a report the Bar Society had commissioned by Douglas Ruck, senior African Nova Scotia lawyer on racism in the Bar Society. So Lyle Howe had tried to use this report as evidence that he had been mistreated by the panel of the Bar Society. Anyway, Court of Appeal tossed that out, said no, no, that's not the case. They took 30 pages to talk about why it wasn't a racial issue. But the part that jumped out at me was in the Ruck Report, I noticed that he had talked about Lyle Howe right after he talked about Donald Marshall Jr. Donald Marshall Jr. of the Marshall inquiry and the, Marshall fisheries decisions, and made a comparison between the two. Well, the Court of Appeal didn't stand for that. They said that to the extent there was any comparison between the two, it was an inappropriate comparison for Ruck to make because Donald Marshall Jr. actually spent 12 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit because of a racist system that was put him behind bars. So when I read the report initially, I thought this is a problem. The Court of Appeal noticed that too. So anyway, a couple of other things. Paul, we were right on the London hockey trial.
Yes, we were, unfortunately, but there were no winners there. So,
No, definitely not. Well, I was going to say the EM, the victim, we don't know how much money she got from Hockey Canada, but I guess she got some money from the situation. Weird, just to set it up. So the Justice Maria Caroccia, Ontario Court of or Justice, Ontario Supreme Court Justice, gave a 5 hour verdict. This is a strange thing, Paul, just for people that ever listen to judicial verdicts. She basically said up front, I don't believe her. I don't find her credible or reliable. And then went on for 5 hours to give her decision. Normally, judges will save that key part till the end, like, all right, here's everything I heard and thought about, and here's my decision. She kind of gave that decision up front, so took some of the drama out of the situation. Some have argued that the players are the real victims. Where are you coming out on this?
well, as I said before, like none of the people should have been in that situation, her or the hockey players. Somebody should have had some sense not to be there. Um, and as you said earlier, we said from the beginning, it was a difficult case. Was she there? And it sort of has this sort of air about it. Was she a victim, or did she have regrets? And were her regrets as real as she said they were? Because she didn't bring the case forward. Women's groups brought the case forward,
Yeah.
and she had already received a settlement, even though the players were not even part of that process and never got to tell their side of the story.
Yeah.
It's absolutely complicated, but nobody should have been in there that night. It's a bad situation.
Yeah. The players now, the NHL has not said it, well, they're still against reinstating the players, or that's their position at the moment. Looks like the public opinion might be shifting a little bit. And I noticed that the lawyers for the players after the verdict were already starting to think in those terms. These players were found not guilty. The judge was as clear as she could be about all of it. Yeah, they shouldn't have been in there either. Maybe it was inappropriate. It doesn't look great on everybody, but nothing was illegal. Shouldn't they be allowed to play in the NHL? I know Oilers fans wouldn't mind having Carter Hart there to as an all-star goalie. There seems to be some momentum to allow these players back in.
I mean,
So
historically, Adam, I've said this before. If you're focusing on these guys, if you look at, I would dare say, more than half of professional athletes whose teams travel on the road, more than half the players, I would suspect, based on what I've seen over the years, have been involved in raunchy sex of one kind or another in a hotel room in some city here or there. Um, this got out of hand, but by that standard, there's a lot of players who shouldn't be playing now who are playing who've been caught up in this. This is sort of the world they live in.
yeah,
One of the reasons why you see now with the players receiving millions and millions of dollars and tens of millions of dollars per season, their targets, and so now they rely on escorts, sort of contract sex a lot rather than just picking up someone in a bar or a gang in a bar and
yeah.
going back to their hotel room. I've seen it in the past, and it's a real issue. I mean, this is part of the culture, not only in hockey, but as they're trying to say, this is hockey culture. It's baseball, football. It's all sports like that, all pro sports.
Absolutely. This case not looking great for the prosecution, particularly so the police, originally the London police said there's not a reasonable prospect of conviction here, and they didn't pursue charges originally. There was no new investigation after the civil suit came out and that was publicized. There was no new police investigation that came out with any more details. But then the prosecution decided to proceed anyway because seemingly because of the public pressure from these groups, support groups. And I just think they picked the wrong case to champion, And the prosecutor said, the Crown doesn't look for victories, we just look for fair trials. Well, but they have the discretion as to which trials to pursue, and I think this was a bad judgment call.
Well, and it's again another example of pressure groups, politics. Um, the thing was settled in a civil case, and then you got a bunch of radical people picking it up and saying, "We're going to go forward and do this," without ever sort of analyzing all the facts. A woman must be believed. This mentality, a woman must be believed at all times. Well, you can't be, as one of the people said, you can't base the law on that.
No,
Just because someone says they were victims, they can't be victims until it's proven they're victims. That's how the law works. Otherwise, you have tyranny.
yeah, and it's I've seen lots of comments from, public figures and just others on Facebook and other places talking about how tragic this outcome is. Well, no, if you listen to the judge's 5-hour verdict where she went through all evidence and talked about why things weren't credible and all these things, it was the right verdict. So why, like, it's not like the justice system is against I mean, yes, there were problems and she had to testify for too long and all those things. There was things that could be changed. Um, but the outcome is not a tragedy. It's justice. So,
Yeah, I agree.
okay, let's Paul, I want to bring in Curt Allen. Let's see if he's still in the waiting room there. I think he was. We'll track down Curt here. All right.
His microphone is off.
Yeah. See him
Not anymore.
How are you doing there, Curt?
Doing fine. How are you guys?
Hey, doing great. Great to see you.
Good to see you. You notice I have my reading glasses on because I have some notes.
Okay, great. Well, hey,
Hope they don't fall off of my
you could
nose.
be in good company there, Curt. Nothing wrong with some reading glasses.
Well, let's reintroduce Curt first of all. That Curt, you served as deputy commissioner of the RCMP. You're involved in other policing over the years. Recently left the Halton Police Regional Board of Policing. You're involved in private or government jobs as well. I think you were twice interviewed for commissioner. Is that true?
That is true. Yes, yes, I was.
And how did you not get to be commissioner?
Well, I was going to talk about selection a little later on in the discussion, but now that you bring it up, I was interviewed twice. The first time I was interviewed as a favor, I think, to the then serving commissioner because there weren't a lot of people who had stepped forward, I guess. Second time, I was very serious about it. But in the two times that I was interviewed, I really wasn't asked a question about public safety. And I really wasn't asked a question about the length or extent of my policing knowledge or experience. And so I sort of came to the conclusion, and I think a lot of people have, that selections are made on the basis of some criteria that the federal government might have that might be more applicable to public service roles. I don't know, but that was my experience. So,
Who would
and
have hired you then? Like who would be doing the interviewing?
well, in the first, well, it were ministers of the crown. I mean, I think a more recent, there has been a selection committee established of all kinds of, quite a significant number of people with representatives from various communities across the country. What that brings to the table, I'm not sure. But back in my day, the two times that I was interviewed, the first time there was one minister of the crown, or maybe two, but if there was a second one, I forget who it was. The second time there were two ministers of the crown and one or two other people. But you self-identified back in my day. If you thought you wanted to be commissioner or apply for the position, you self-identified, except for the time when I was asked to participate as a favor, I think, to the then serving commissioner. But
Unbelievable that you wouldn't be asked about public safety experience or thoughts during such an interview.
well, this I think this goes to some of the challenges that the organization has had for many years, and I was going to say this later on in the discussion, but I'll say it now. I've asked a lot of people. I know a lot of senior people in policing. I live in Ontario, so they're not RCMP people, obviously. And I've asked a great number of police leaders to reflect and tell me the name of the commissioner of the RCMP in their service time who chiefs of major police services other than the RCMP would have had respect for based on the individual's policing knowledge experience. And I haven't found anybody yet that's brought a name forward. And I think that says a lot. It says a great deal to me. I think that staffing at senior positions in the RCMP has not really dealt with the things that it should have. And I think, if anything, it may be in the same situation today. When we're more interested in ticking boxes, whatever they may be, than we are trying to understand who would be the best person from a public safety point of view. the knowledge and experience that the individual brings to the job, the credibility the individual has. And I'm not saying that was me. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that that should be the test.
Okay,
And
Curt.
it should be somebody in the National Police Service, that chiefs of major police services in the country, including commissioners of the OPP and Services of Quebec, would have some respect for and would want to gather around and figure out how to work together.
Curt, there's one question I have for you before we move into what we're going to talk about. In your last appearance, 90% of the response was positive, but a couple of cops, ex-cops, asked this question. They said, if he was there for so long at the RCMP, why didn't he make changes?
Well, I think you have to understand the culture of the organization, and I think you have to understand the perceived position power that the commissioner holds in the organization. And I think it's a problem today. I think it needs to be changed. And I've had discussions with people in the federal government as well as other people about the notion of making some change to that, to the structure at the top of the organization. The RCMP has been fraught with issues, as we all know, over many, many years, over decades, actually. And we struggle with trying to understand why they can't hire. Well, one only has to think of the class actions that have been settled in recent times and nobody held accountable for that I'm aware of, and the class actions that are still working their way through the court system. To understand that when you look at from a young person's point of view, when you look at the image of the RCMP, it has issues, it has challenges, it has problems. And then when you look at the leadership being a challenge itself, and the struggles that it has in hiring and in doing other things, it's clear, it's crystal clear to me. It has a lot of problems. It needs different leadership.
So why couldn't things get done when you were there? That was the question.
Well, I think I answered it. I mean, you get disappointed sometimes because the issues that the organization is caught up in are not the ones that it should be. And sometimes one voice might be frowned upon. I was that voice at times. And I was told by one colleague on the executive committee that my body language at times was very loud. And indeed it was. And I've had conversations with people since I left the organization wondering if things had changed, and I don't think they have. And, I asked one person, what percentage of the senior executive committee agenda, when it meets, when it retreats or whatever it does, is focused on organized crime, is focused on the front line, is focused on working together and policing across the country. And I think you'd find that the answer is not the way it should be. And I suspect it would be the same way today.
I was gonna since you left the RCMP, you've been doing consulting with other police forces and lots of contact with different forces around the country. Has that been a problem to the same extent with those organizations as it was with the RCMP?
No, Adam, I think it comes back to governance. I'm gonna take my glasses off. We talked a little bit about that the last time I was on. And in Ontario, as an example, each police service has a board, and the board does the hiring of the chief. The accountability is local. The accountability is at the region or municipality level. And with the RCMP, the accountability, such as it is, resides with the Prime Minister making an appointment and resides with a minister who may know very little or nothing about policing. And I think that, that says a lot, right?
Well, what was it? The public safety minister this week didn't know what a didn't know anything about gun licensing. He was asked some questions. He didn't know what an RPAL was. Didn't know what the firearm safety program was. Like basic stuff.
And there was a really good column on that the other day by Robin Urbach in the Globe and Mail saying that the public safety minister, um, I can't pronounce his name. What is it? Anander Sandri? Been
What
there
was that?
3 months, knows nothing. Has made number of questionable decisions, but he's not dissimilar to public safety ministers elsewhere across the country. Knows nothing about policing or the justice system, it seems. They're just there for one reason or another, you know? And you've seen that, Curt, I guess, over the years, the appointment of public safety ministers who don't seem to bring much to the table.
And
I
then
have I have seen public safety or solicitor generals. In my day, it was more solicitor general appointments in ministries. I have seen solicitor generals that took keen interest in it and really wanted to understand and were there to help. And I've seen others that didn't perhaps know enough at the basic level to take that point of view.
And that's public safety minister Gary Ananda Sangari. I got
yeah,
his name.
I think he had some conflict of interest issues when he first was appointed that were a problem too. So anyway,
Anyway, let's move
yeah.
forward.
Okay, so I thought we were going to talk about the police review in Nova Scotia, but I wanted to, if it's okay with you guys, I wanted to start by positioning policing as I know it in Ontario, and some of the challenges that are bringing about change. And then let's reflect on what's happening, why it's happening, and then look at the choice that should be made in Nova Scotia. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, so one of the things that's happened in policing over recent years, many years actually, not necessarily recent years, is calls for service today in any police organization of any size are at least 80% of a nature that require little or no investigation. And that has changed significantly. And Adam, you may see that in terms of the volume of work that's coming to criminal court. And a lot of that are societal changes. And police are finding themselves involved in more of society's social issues. And that has implications for police services that are significant. When a major police service is involved in policing 80% of the time calls for service that aren't going to make it into a court of any kind, the ability of an officer to investigate, investigation being an art, diminishes. They're not challenged the same. They lose that skill. Problems set in because there still is crime. There may be more crime than there has been in the past, and I would say that's the case over recent years, particularly since COVID. And it's caused some jurisdictions to start looking at policing through a lens that they need a different mix of resources. For example, in Ontario, some police services, when it comes to critical incident response team, instead of strictly red lights, guns, sirens, uniforms, they have a team that is made up of perhaps a psychologist, perhaps a nurse, perhaps an officer out of uniform or in uniform, brings other resources to bear on an issue that really isn't necessarily a policing issue. But our governments seem to think that it is a policing issue. And so what that has really meant is that it's also had some jurisdictions look at whether or not we need a policing category that is somewhat less than a fully trained police officer. And you get into the notion of community constables. And the community constables and other resources would attend to a lot of those, that 80% of issues, calls for service that are not going to involve extensive investigation, leaving the fully trained officers. Now, one thing to understand is that that pool of community constables and these other resources are a good feeder line to recruit. And for example, the police board that I sat on here for 6 years, we're not having a problem hiring people of any. There are challenges, but the organization implemented a cadet program. The organization is doing innovative things that is attracting people. And I think that again comes in large way from that notion that at least 80% of the calls for service perhaps aren't what they were many, many years ago.
Well, one of the things, let me interrupt you there. Like one of the things the RCMP said this week was um, that they have difficulty getting recruits. One of the reasons being that they have a recruit has to, average recruit now is 27 or 28 years old. They have to go to Regina and they're only paid $525 a week. And they want to bump that up to make it a living wage for the 6 months and hope that'll improve their recruiting. Do you think that's going to work for the RCMP?
I think for the RCMP, the biggest problem is an image problem. And I think that's a problem for some police services. And I think it goes to the various roles that society has cast them in these days. I didn't join the RCMP in 1965 to be a social worker. I joined the RCMP to understand what was going on from a crime point of view and to investigate crime. And that role has changed. That responsibility is still there, but it's influenced by a lot of other things today. And I think the more enlightened police services are finding ways to look at different categories of resources, which is making it easier to address societal issues and staff the organization.
So you're talking, Curt, about different levels. So you have their cadets, and then you have community officers, and then ultimately from that pool, those two pools, you would do much of your recruiting for full service officers, if I could put it that way.
Well, I think that's part of it, Adam. But I also think that you're recruiting the officer that's going to be fully trained at the same time all throughout. Okay, so
Yeah.
there are universities that have programs today that deal more with preparation for policing and that kind of thing. And I think so. You're looking for those people all the time,
Mhm.
but a feeder pool, a cadet program, and an auxiliary program can be excellent feeder programs because it brings them into the organization and they work hand in hand with the officers and they understand what the role is, and it just makes it easier to recruit. In Ontario, and it should be the same across those provinces that are growing swiftly, there's a big demand for police officers. As the population grows, we need more police officers. Ontario is struggling right now with the ability to train sufficient people from the point of view of training facilities, because officers are retiring and population is growing. Police services are growing quite extensively, and we need recruits. And we need to understand that we need different resources today than we did back when I joined, because the role has changed significantly. And those organizations that are leading edge have also, through this process, found a way to focus on wellness of their officers. And in the organization that the board of which I was on, that organization has had a wellness unit for many, many years that has a full-time psychologist on staff, has other employees on staff. neither the board nor the police executive know who is going to this wellness unit. But the whole idea, it's an investment to keep frontline officers working. And it's working because people are able to get professional help without even the knowledge of the organization when they need it.
Okay, then look at that. Now we're getting back to Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia, in their review, said we're moving forward. We would like the Mounties to run everything, basically. We'll make some exceptions here and there, but it's almost like a single-tiered policing they envision. And the Mounties themselves, in spite of all the issues with the Mounties, I mean, look at the three of us here. We're not here, the Mounties will say we're here because, oh, we've got a beef against the Mounties. No, we're standing on, we're the voices for all the people who have done all the reports over the years showing what's wrong with this force. And we're articulating it because no one else is articulating it. And what do you think Nova Scotia is thinking when they say go ahead with the RCMP as the only police force and ruling out any sort of change in structure and personnel?
Well, let me look at it from a higher level initially. When I look at policing in Canada and I look at a national police service, I have come to the conclusion that the RCMP today is not providing a credible federal presence. It is struggling provincially, and it is being removed from certain municipal detachments. I think there will be more of that. So my take on what Nova Scotia should do is, and just before I answer the center of that, I have a lot of respect for Newfoundland. When I look at Atlantic Canada and look at Newfoundland and look at the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary, there's I didn't many years ago when I was in the RCMP, trust me, when Newfoundland was saying the RCMP is getting smaller and constabulary is getting bigger. But when I look at it today, one of the challenges of having the RCMP police in any jurisdiction is the notion that they're trying to hire people from across the country to police in areas that they will never really be familiar with and may not even want to serve in. And I think that's a big issue. And when I look at the leadership issues that the organization has had and is having, and Adam, you asked me a question like, what did I think about the rarity of a Porta-Pick? A question along that line. Porta-Pick, I don't think should have been a rare occasion. I think the response was woefully inadequate, and it became a rare occasion. I mean, every day in this country, there are people that have some form of a crisis, a mental crisis. But the response should control that crisis and shouldn't let it get out of hand. But someone is able to go on a spree for 13 or 14 hours and travel some significant distance undetected in 2020. And as I said earlier, without eyes in the sky, I like this organization, and I know, Paul, you sent me an article that said the RCMP is saying everything's fixed. Well, they said the same thing after Marathor, same thing after Moncton, and now they're saying it after Porta-Pick. And I question that. I'm not really sure what that means.
Well, Curt, you mentioned earlier about the image of the RCMP, and in the Deloitte report that was sort of the basis of the Nova Scotia Police Review conclusions and all right, RCMP, you're everything now. They don't even mention that the RCMP has had some image struggles, to put it mildly, in the last number of years. It's not even in the report as a factor to be considered on balance with other options. I thought that was a very peculiar and must have been purposeful omission.
Well, I agree with that, but I also don't think it mentioned the struggles that they're having to hire. I don't know where they're up to strength, if anywhere. And I think that's in every contract situation and federally. And so why would like, here's the way I look at it. Like, I came from Nova Scotia. I left. I'm not going back. I don't want to go back. I'm enjoying my life where I am today. But I think Atlantic Canada has had a habit of kicking the can down the road and making a decision today to keep the RCMP in a role that Canadians know it's struggling in. To me, doesn't make sense. It's kicking that can down the road and may be based quite practically on costs. If 30% of the cost is going to be paid by somebody else, then that's an attractive option, perhaps, to some. It's not to me, because I think that if someone was to take a look at what other jurisdictions are doing, I think there are tremendous cost savings by moving forward with what, for example, is happening in Ontario. And I've said before, this notion of having 53 detachments scattered around the edges of the province, we have tiny numbers of members. It's difficult to make changes to, the various roles and the various civilians that they would hire to change that mix. It's hard to change that mix when you're dealing with tiny numbers of people. And I think, that Nova Scotia should, like other jurisdictions, be focused more on a hubbing in some way. And I'm not that familiar with the geography anymore because I'm not there, but there are some centers that are larger than others, where you can bring a larger number of resources together, bring the professional resources that you need within that mix, that for the most part aren't going to cost $200,000, which is what that frontline officer on the road costs today pretty well. And you're going to have much better policing, and you're going to have better public security. For me, it's all about public security. If we can't secure the public, and Portapique, I think, is the worst example in the Canadian history of a situation that got woefully out of hand through just a totally inadequate response and lack of preparation. And if you have a hubbing situation, you have larger numbers of resources to call on a different mix of resources. You can have different training facilities. You can have better preparation. It just makes all the sense in the world to me.
Last week, Curt, we brought up the story of one of the bugaboos I've had over the years is that police services branches of public safety ministries being controlled by ex-Mounties or people close to the Mounties. And then we showed last week that the executive director of public safety branch in Nova Scotia, who is sort of the spokesperson for this review and about how the Mounties are going to be here forever, was actually worked for the Mounties, and her husband is a Mountie. The Mounties have infiltrated, to my mind, many police services branches across the country. Is that something you know about, or is that the way the force always works? Is that the way the force gets its way?
Well, I don't know if I were to. I know in the past that there were some provinces that tended to have former members working in the ministry that was looking after policing. I'm not sure that in itself is a problem. Here's what I do think. I think it's a conflict of interest in the situation in Halifax. If someone is trying to make that decision or making recommendations on the way forward and is married to a member, I think someone should look at that situation and say, does that make sense? Is the public really going to see this and think this is the way it should be? But worse than that, I recall hearing, and I don't know if it's true, that there were spouses of the senior members of the division in Nova Scotia who were involved in the Portapique investigation and screening of information correspondence that went to the Mass Casualty Commission. And I would think, I just don't understand those kinds of things happening. So there's a lot, Paul, that I don't understand. In my day and still in my mind, these are all serious conflicts of interest and should never happen. But some should be calling it out.
I think you're right, Kurt, to make the distinction too, because, naturally, like it would be people like yourself, right? Former RCMP, but not, not tied to the culture and the image and all that stuff, but have this, body of expertise developed over a career that can be used in another setting, as compared to somebody with a current pecuniary interest in,
Yeah,
a financial interest in the RCMP continuing in a province. I mean,
right. Yeah,
that's
and
a clear
married,
conflict.
yeah, and spouse, yeah, a member of the service. I think, see, in my day, um, I wouldn't have been sleeping well with those kinds of things happening.
Yeah. It's a direct conflict or a perceived conflict. I mean, you have to be mindful of both of those things.
Well, the perception of conflict sometimes is more damning than the actual conflict
Yeah,
itself, right? And,
absolutely.
and and you know, like these are two people that don't, neither of them need to be involved in that discussion, right? I mean, and today, not today. I mean, I know years ago, British Columbia, is the biggest province when it comes to the population of RCMP members. And there was in the Solicitor General's ministry, former people from the RCMP. I knew that. But British Columbia was also the lead province in their negotiation of the contracts, which I had a concern about for sure. Um, but this is politics. Let's not forget that this is politics, and conflicts in politics seem to be defined a little differently, perhaps, than in other jurisdictions or other sectors.
Yeah, seems to be the case.
I think we only got a few minutes left for this session, but one of the questions I wanted to ask you was this whole notion. We've heard this during the Nova Scotia review thing, and I noticed out west the same phrases being used by Mounties and their supporters. The Mounties are here to stay. They're using this notion that the Mounties aren't going anywhere. It's like a marketing campaign. And what I see is the Mounties have put themselves in a position in the last couple of years where they essentially lobby the public, do marketing campaigns as a government agency, essentially lobbying the government, which seems to me to be unseemly. The police shouldn't be doing this. The politicians should be doing this. But it seems a way for the police to basically get their way, the RCMP to enforce or protect its survival, and allows the politicians to not do anything. And should the RCMP be allowed to lobby this way uh, in public, do surveys, do marketing campaigns, things like that? It seems unseemly to me when it's all about their survival.
Well, I would look at it a little different way, Paul. I would suggest to you that if the province of Nova Scotia, the government of Nova Scotia, the Premier's office was to lead a survey of the population on the future of policing, I dare say that the RCMP might not win. Because I think the image of the RCMP and the reputation of the RCMP took a took a huge hit with Portapic.
It's an interesting, actually, Kurt and Paul, you may not know this. I finished my term on the board of Engage Nova Scotia, but one of the things they did just pre-pandemic was a major survey of Nova Scotians. They had 16,000 responses, a huge response rate, and it was an in-depth quality of life questionnaire. Took 45 minutes to answer. Another version is coming out this fall that's going to have many of those same questions. Some of them are on commuting and entertainment options and all these other quality of life measures, but one is public safety and perceptions of public safety. And it's broken down by regions in Nova Scotia. So it'll be very interesting among the results to look at regions that are policed by the RCMP versus municipal forces and see if there's a distinction, a meaningful distinction in those numbers, because that could create some momentum in a certain direction depending on what the numbers show as well. So something to watch for.
Yeah, no, I think that the public, mind you, the public's complacent, right? Um, Down east, perhaps more so than some other areas.
Yeah.
Uh, but I think the public should have a view, and obviously does have a view that should be heard.
Yeah. All right, Kurt. Well, yeah, we're coming to the close to the end of the hour there. Anything else that you wanted to get off your chest, I guess, for now, or anything that we haven't covered?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I'd like to continue the conversation with you guys going forward. One thought that occurred to me, I listened to the the programs that you had Mr. Juby on, and one of the things that I didn't know, and I still don't know if it's a fact, that there was blood of two unknown people on Wortman's clothing or something. And I find if that's the case, I find that, and if the file is closed today, for all intents and purposes, I find that very troubling. I don't know. Back in my day, anyone that worked in CIB and was a CIB reader, in other words, a criminal investigation branch reader who read all of the investigation reports that were done wherever one was stationed in whatever province. I don't know, I didn't know CIB reader that nor should CIB reader agree with concluded here on that file. That's very troubling to me.
Well, it could be the two the blood from the two unknown males came from two of the victims, but why wasn't that figured out? It's easy to figure out in this day and age whose blood it was. So you're right. It raises troubling questions and it invites speculation that shouldn't be there. You think the police would have done, the RCMP would have done something about that at the time, but they were sort of slow to get to it anyways. They didn't seem all that interested and only got to it and did the testing after a public inquiry was called, not before.
Yeah, I understand that, Paul, and I understand that blood samples sometimes aren't adequate. I understand that all kinds of samples might not be adequate for analysis. Uh, but having said that, I don't understand why a file would be considered closed without further investigation of that. And it's not only that situation. There's speculation about who killed all of these people, and I don't know. I find it troubling that everyone seems to want to forget and move on. Um, I'm having a problem myself, and I'm a long ways away.
Well, you're not alone in that regard, Kurt. People don't understand why this is just being shoved under the rug, and everybody's just moving on like it didn't happen in many ways. So we'll keep on it, and yeah, I'd love to have you back. I'm glad to hear that. You mentioned a few things just in your last series of comments that I had a bunch of questions about, but we'll save those for the next round. This is great.
All right, I'll be here. Thanks very much.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very
See you
much, Kurt.
later. Hey,
Appreciate
Kurt, one last thing.
Yeah.
Who killed Corey Ellison?
it.
Bye.
It's trendy. All right.
Bye.
Okay, so that's I think that's trending, Paul. We're getting out there.
He's disturbed by it. He's sitting far back, in Ontario, but the government of Nova Scotia isn't bothered by it. Any of
No.
these questions? No, Haley Crichton at the executive director of the police services, she's not bothered by it. I ran into a politically connected person the other day in Nova Scotia who said, "Oh, how's your book doing?" And I said, "Oh, well, it's sort of been up to number one at some point in
Okay.
Canada." And they said, "Yeah, I don't know much about that story." Like, what? You're in Nova Scotia, you're politically, you don't, it's like you have a province of people who far too many want to just put their heads in the sand, not deal with anything. Just hope it goes away. As Curt said, push it down the road, make it go away.
It's amazing, Paul. Like, so uh we're here in the middle of the summer, and what would you say has been the major Nova Scotian political story of the summer? One might argue it is whether Morris Street in Halifax, how many people even know where that is, should be a one lane or two lane road and should have a bike lane. That seems to be the major political story of the Nova Scotia summer of 2025.
Yeah, and getting stories done. I talked about it last week. The Haley Crichton story. I know media know about it now.
Yeah,
I personally talked to a senior editor in Halifax. That this is a story, as Curt said, this is a perceived conflict of interest, if not an actual conflict of interest.
yeah.
Something should be done, and you can't get them to do anything. But they do the story that Curt referred to the other day about the RCMP saying we fixed everything, like they said in Mayerthorpe, like they said in Moncton, and the Halifax Chronicle Herald ran the story straight face with no sort of skepticism, no sort of feedback, no pointing out the past that the RCMP has done this. It's just like a public relations release for the RCMP. When they know about this conflict, Haley Crichton, and all this stuff going on in the background. This is it, and it makes you
Yeah.
wonder. I used to look one last point. I used to look back at the days of Donald Trump and the gang calling things fake news. I can see how that happens
Of
now.
course. Yeah.
Like I'm reading the newspaper and it's not real.
Like,
It's like you're not telling the real story.
yeah, it's it's like what the yeah, Russian or North Korean news sometimes. We'll just print the government release. I'm sure that's accurate. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, we'll keep at it, Paul. So we may have Andrew Douglas on next week if he's not still testifying. We'll see. Maybe some other guests that materialize too. But
Yeah.
we'll be back with lots more. And as always, things happening in the summer. I know the cases that I mentioned from the Supreme Court earlier. You think, well, there's no news in the summer. Well, sometimes there's interesting news, and we'll find it. We'll bring it to you, and appreciate everybody listening and watching. And yeah.
And we're still in the hunt. Who killed Corey
In
Ellison?
the hunt. Let's go find it
Yeah,
out,
just
people.
give us more information. We're following it, and we're going to come back to it and address it in more detail in the near future.
All right. So thanks again, everybody, for watching. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
See you. Thank